We're live.
Hello, Tridelta Land. Thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Marianne Kale, and I am the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for Tridelta, and we are super excited that y'all are with us tonight. First and foremost, a little bit of a disclaimer. This is the first time that we're going live on two platforms, so YouTube Live and Facebook Live, and we hope that we're going to make this happen. We're really excited. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we are joining the National Alliance on Mental Illness and the national movement to raise awareness about Mental Health Awareness Month. And we have one of our friends, someone that I've known his entire professional career pretty much, and someone who has truly been an advocate and really sets the stage, I think, for those of us who have known and watched him and the mental health community come together, and that is Ross Szabo. Ross is truly a friend to Tridelta and many of our sister and interfraternal friends. And I'd like to welcome Ross and welcome you all. And we're going to have a conversation today that we know when you walk away, you're going to be like, okay, I think that I have a better understanding how maybe I can help myself and others. So Ross, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Marianne. It's good to be here with you, and another opportunity to speak to everyone at Tridelta, which is always one of my favorite things to do. So I'll give you the briefest introduction I can. I was the director of the National Mental Health Awareness Campaign from 2002 to 2010, and that campaign was originally started at the White House by the Clinton administration in 1999 as the first public health approach to mental health in the country. And so our main focus was creating large-scale mental health presentations for people of all ages. In 2006, we created the first youth mental health speakers bureau in the country. And then in 2007, I wrote a book called Behind Happy Faces. By 2010, I had burned out. I trained like 50 speakers, spoken to 1 million people. So I did what anyone does when they're exhausted. I joined the Peace Corps. I was like, oh man, I'm so
Of course you
tired.
did.
I'm just going to go. And I lived in Botswana in Southern Africa, came back in 2013 and realized that like mental health awareness is really important, but we need to move past awareness and start teaching people and educating people about their mental health the same way we would their physical health. So I launched a company called Human Power Project in 2013. And then by 2016, the curriculum I developed was being used all over the country. And I was consulting at UCLA, and they came to me and they asked me what would I do if I got to create a school. They were opening a middle school, high school for students in grades 6 through 12. And I said, well, if I got to create a school, then I would have a class where once a week kids learn about their mental health, and it's mandatory from grade 6 to grades 12. And so I became a founding faculty member of Geffen Academy at UCLA. And I've been teaching and still running my company on the side. I also recently wrote a children's book called A Kid's Book About Anxiety, and just developed a new corporate curriculum for adults. So now I'm just the whole gambit, kids all the way through adults. So that's the professional intro. The personal intro is was born into a family with severe mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and addiction, and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 16. I was hospitalized for attempting to take my own life in the midst of a deep depression at 17. And then it really didn't get much better after that. I was in and out of hospitals and different colleges for the next 6 years until I found a way to really manage my mental health. And now to this day, still working and finding new ways to take care of my mental health.
Well, some of our sisters out there might be like, wow, this guy is amazing. But why is he talking to us as Trideltas? And, Tridelta's been in the forefront of talking about mental health. And the theme of this month's Mental Health Awareness Month is You're Not Alone. And as Trideltas, we know in Tridelta Sisterhood that it's stronger when we're together. And you teach that. You teach that as community and belonging, that that's important to us. But we really became acquainted and got to know you as an organization when we decided to have you come and have us be a part of your Behind Happy Faces program. And so, why don't you talk to us a little bit about why is that important to us as an organization to partner with you, someone who has a tested curriculum that really takes peers and helps them to be able to talk to one another about mental health?
Well, I think the whole goal of Behind Happy Faces is to normalize mental health, build vocabulary for how to talk about it, but actually form deeper connections. I think when we look at any sorority or fraternity, it comes down to that sense of belonging. It comes down to sisterhood and brotherhood. And at the core of all of that is mental health. It's how you take care of yourself. It's how you communicate. It's your relationships. And so I think what has been really great in this partnership is that Behind Happy Faces that we rolled out at Tri Delta wasn't just my influence. I worked with the entire Tri Delta headquarters staff in different ways of shooting videos and altering the curriculum to make sure that it fit what Tri Delta wanted and needed. There is no kind of one size fits all mental health plan. And so we really spoke to some of the bigger issues that young women are experiencing and tried to focus on that type of education. And so I think a lot of times mental health gets pigeonholed in so many different ways. And the reality is Tri Delta took an approach of looking at this and saying, it's not just mental health. This is about sisterhood. It's about community. It's about our values. It's about how we take care of each other.
Well, and I'm not a Tri Delta, but they do everything in three. So I'm not surprised that it would be in multiples, 3, 6, 9, whatever that would look like. And I think any of us who have heard you speak, and our CEO, Karen White, would typically, she's missed in several calls on webinars and board meetings where her aha moment, and I think it's been all of ours, is that you talk about that if something was wrong physically in our physical health, we would figure out a way to fix it. But mental health, sometimes we just push that to the side and just think it's going to work itself through. How, especially as we look at this time, right, in COVID-19, the pandemic, what does that look like today? I think, we've had these conversations, again, seen you on stage many times. What's your message today that might look a little different, or does it?
Well, there's certainly some things that are different and some things stay the same. I appreciate you taking that deep breath. I think that's appropriate when we talk about this pandemic. I think the framing is the same. Everyone watching this knows how to work on their physical health. They know they have to exercise. They know they have to eat right. They know they have to take care of their body. They know they have to look at their biological predisposition, and they know that they can practice things and get better at them. Nobody wakes up and runs a 5K unless you're really gifted and lucky to do that, right? You train and you train and you train, and then eventually you run some longer distance, or you walk a longer distance, or you bike a longer distance. And so the theme here that does carry over is when you're working on your mental health during this pandemic, it is about practice, and it is about habit formation, and it is about trying to get a little bit better at things, because all of us throughout the quarantine have had a moment where we're like, I don't know if I want to do this. And we binge ate some donuts, or we drank too much, or we had something happen that was just natural. And so what I think is most important about mental health during this time is it's not about getting it perfect. It's about getting a little bit better at the things that you're working on. And everybody's working on different things. Some people are working on communication. Some people are working on better coping skills. Some people are working on reaching out to people or doing something different. So I think the thing that stays the same is you can work on mental health like physical health. I think the thing that's different is you have a lot of time. So take those small steps. Don't expect it to just get better.
That's a great point. Well, let's break it down a little bit. What about college students? What are your thoughts? We
Hmm.
probably have, our members who are out there. Some of them are college students, and some of them might be parents of college students or,
Hmm.
are involved. What are some of your thoughts? In the program Behind Happy Faces, you talk about ineffective coping. Let's break it down a
Hmm.
little bit about, you said some people might be eating a little bit too much or drinking a little bit too much. Where
Yeah.
do you think, or where have you kind of seen? I know that there's tons of articles and webinars, but where do you see college students right now with the uncertainty of the fall, and what will that look like? What are some of your thoughts about that?
So I think there's a couple of things that college students and their parents and people of every age can do. And the first thing is when we look at every cause of stress as just one thing that is destroying us, it's really hard to feel like there's hope. So the first thing is separating all of your causes of stress into different buckets. So like the quarantine itself is a bucket. The uncertainty about the future of school is a bucket. Your finances is a bucket. Your family is a bucket. Like all these different causes of stress, and then deciding like which one is the most full, and then addressing that one individually. If we try to address all of those things at the same time, it's almost impossible to do it. So the first thing is like, all right, I have to separate these causes of stress to see them clearly and how they're impacting my life. Then the next part, that's just the identification piece. The next part is actually coping with it. And that I think the best way I can just describe that is when we think about ineffective coping mechanisms, they're usually reinforcing a negative emotion or any emotion. It doesn't even have to be negative. When we think about effective coping mechanisms, that's how you kind of release emotion. And so everyone's dividing line is different. Somebody might say listening to music is effective for them, but then they are like in a sad state and they listen to sad music for like a week and then now like they're more depressed, right?
Yeah.
Somebody could say exercise is really effective, but it's not for somebody who might have an eating disorder who is, running 10 miles a day to punish themselves, to reinforce the negative emotion. So the challenge when we talk about coping mechanisms is we can't ever say like the same coping mechanism works for everybody. It's different for everybody. And that's why I like to use the dividing line of how do you release emotion versus how do you reinforce it? Because we all know somebody who like vents, and as they're venting, sometimes they're releasing the emotion, and other times they're just reinforcing every problem more and more and more.
Right, right. What about our alumni? What would you tell them? They're trying to prioritize. Some of them may, and we know some folks have lost their jobs, and some people may be experiencing. Some of them are homeschooling children and working. Many of us, we have Zoom fatigue in some regards because when was the last time we really thought we would be on screens this much? Let's hope when we come out of this, we want to just have real life conversations instead.
Yeah.
But what are some of your thoughts about coping with, I know you talked about buckets and those pieces, but specifically, what would you say to someone who says, wow, this is a lot, and some people it's like, this is great, but so, it gives me some time to slow down. But for many people, it's been stressful or at least at the beginning, maybe they've figured out some ways since then. But what would your thoughts be?
Yeah. So another tip I would have is whenever we don't have a locus of control over our lives, whenever we feel like things are out of control, we're in a constant state of bad stress. We're in a constant state of feeling like we can't cope, feeling like there's no hope, feeling like there's a lot happening. So having a locus of control, even if it's over the smallest thing, is really important. So like if anyone of any age is in that place where they're like, this is too much, take control of the things that you do have in your life. You can control how you talk to your friends or family. You can control how you cope. You're never going to actually be able to control all of the causes of stress in your life, but you can take control over how you respond to them. Even if it is something as devastating as losing a job or losing a relationship, because relationships are struggling during this time where people are like, I love you. I did not know that 10 weeks of loving you would require all of this, right? So like anything that you have control over in those moments is really important. And if you lose that locus of control, then you do lose yourself. And so, outside of the buckets, outside of releasing or reinforcing emotions, it's really to focus on even the smallest things you have control of.
Very good point. Very good point. So talk to me a little bit about words, because we're spending a lot of time talking to people, which has been, for some folks, maybe a little bit difficult, but words matter and our language matters. What are some thoughts as it relates to mental health? What should we be aware of when we're talking to others and we're having those conversations? Should we just pause for a moment, or what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always, everyone's different. There is no kind of one way to communicate. I think that what I see sometimes in this pandemic is that people are kind of minimizing other people's emotions in it. So like if somebody is like, this really sucks, instead of just letting them have that feeling, letting them feel that trauma, we tend to jump to like, oh, but it's gonna, oh, but like this. There's there's a famous psychology researcher who talks about toxic positivity. Um, and toxic positivity is kind of dismissing people's actual feelings and trying to like move them past where they feel without them having a chance to even feel it for like a few minutes. So I think one thing that's important in words is acknowledging that this is traumatic for people and there is no right or wrong way to express yourself in trauma. Some people want to shut down, some people want to open up. So just give people space, let them talk, listen to them, support them, and you don't need to move them through it so quickly. And then I think the other thing to remember is that because our mental health is like our physical health, we need to understand that using help to balance your mental health is okay for everybody. It's not something that is wrong with you if you need help. Even if you need to talk to someone, go for a walk, whatever it is, read a book, zone out, get some alone time, whatever it is, like that is okay. It's not a judgment. And I think sometimes we're obviously in this country in so many bad extremes, but in one way we're like in an extreme of like don't feel bad, and then in the other way we're in an extreme of like not taking the steps to actually take care of ourselves because we feel bad about that. So you can't have emotion on one side and then you feel bad taking steps to take care of yourself on the other side. There's got to be a middle ground there where we're able to acknowledge people's words and feelings and what they need.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the word I've heard a lot is giving people some grace. Not overreacting, but just being able to say, okay, maybe I just need some space. Especially like for those of us like you and I who travel a lot, our partners are probably like, you can travel. You can do that.
You're like, so, I don't want the COVID. I don't want the COVID.
Exactly.
No one's bringing me to speak. I have to stay here.
Exactly. Well, the theme of mental health this year, the Mental Health Awareness Month this year is You Are Not Alone. And in TriDelta, we have 240,000 members. And so when we talk about friendship and sisterhood, and you talk about this, and you've shared this with me in the past, that one of the things we're supposed to do as sororities is to help people feel like they belong, and that connectivity and creating community is part of coping. What are your thoughts a little bit that you would say, this is what we should be doing maybe more effectively or maybe differently, or maybe we can step into that a little bit in a more caring way? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think during this time, because TriDelta has such a large network and such an effective network, and in the experiences where we were filming the videos for the rollout of the Collegiate and Advisor series, some of the alumni told these just heartwarming stories about how much their sisters have meant to them at every age of their life, through births, through deaths, through marriages, through divorces, through everything. One thing that was endearing to me was seeing how much this TriDelta network means to people and what it can do to provide support. So with that in mind, when we're talking about belonging and connection, those are feelings that we have to be intentional about. I think sometimes, even in the most well-meaning places where people have a network, they feel like connection and belonging is just a given, and they stop being intentional about it. And so I think during this time, it's really important to be intentional. If you're a part of an alumni network, maybe once a week you can have a prompt about mental health that you check in with each other on. And it doesn't have to be some dark thing. I think sometimes when people hear that, they're like, oh, mental health prompt. That means we should ask if anyone is experiencing depression or an anxiety disorder. It doesn't have to be that. It can be just, how are you? Like, really, how are you? Or it can be a prompt of, it's okay to not be okay, and let people, just talk about that. So when you have a network that is as successful and caring and supportive as TriDelta is, the next step during times like this, like a pandemic, is to be really intentional about how you foster that connection and belonging, and how you utilize that network to continue that support.
Well, and I think that that's the important piece, is picking up the phone, or like you're saying, prompting. And TriDelta said part of the purpose is steadfastly love one another. It doesn't say steadfastly love one another only in the good times. It says all the time. And so I think that's part of the commitment that TriDeltas make to one another, and hopefully then that bleeds over into other aspects of their lives as well. When we talk about, let's go back to our students a little bit again. When we talk about the research that's out there right now about how this pandemic and COVID-19 is going to affect their mental health, is there something that we should be really focusing on? I know that we will be rolling out Behind Happy Faces for all of our chapters, but what happens virtually? What if they don't see one another face to face? What can we do to support them as they're going back into these environments, and again, the uncertainty of what that will look like? And every day, we know it changes every minute, what campuses are going to do what, but what should we as TriDeltas be doing, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think with all that uncertainty, and with not knowing like what campus is going to look like, and also the reality that campuses could open up in one way and have to revert to remote learning quickly. Like, there's so many different possibilities. I think the thing to kind of focus on is just preparing your members for, kind of anything that can happen. So like just having that conversation, basically, like making sure that they're understanding of what's going on, that they know what resources are available to them. And again, anytime you have something that is as ominous as that, it is traumatic. And so I have to return to that word of like letting them know that this is serious, this is severe, this is something that will impact them, and then giving space for the fact that it will impact everyone differently. Some people go through trauma and they don't need to talk about it, or they don't want to, and they find a way through it, and they're okay. And other people need to vent, need to break down, need to go through all of the different steps. And so just giving space for the uncertainty of what's going on. And you can talk about coping mechanisms, and you can talk about strategies to take care of your mental health during this time. But I think as TriDelta is looking at, reaching all of their members and their collegiate members with this. It's just to kind of put them in a place where they can prepare in the way that they need to, and letting them know what support is available.
Right. And TriDelta has compiled a resource of resources by campus. And so we do have that available. Have you seen college campuses reaching out to their students to say, our mental health professionals are still available to you? Or what have you seen as in your network?
Yeah, every college that I've worked with, which is probably not a great measure, because if you're reaching out to a mental health advocate, you're probably already aware of mental health. But their counseling centers did stay open, and they were doing Zoom calls for people who needed it. Now, what I also found in dealing with a lot of students was that they did not know that they thought all of the services were closed and that there weren't options. So I do think it can be really important to remind members of what services are available on each campus. The reality is a lot of campuses want to keep people employed, and so they're giving them flexibility in those services, whether it's counseling and psychological services, whether it's career advice, whether it's anything that can support somebody. Most of those things have stayed open because those resources are more valuable now than probably ever.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows what we'll see, especially hopefully we'll see even more support in that area on college campuses as we come back and know that our students will need that. And we hope that as our members are listening and volunteers, or that you let people know that these services are still available to you. And again, we've compiled a list by campus, so we want to be there to support that as well. We've also learned that in a study that said that there was nearly 80% of college students feel hopeful about the future. What can bring hope right now? And why is hope important? And I know that you've talked about that, and both of us are big believers in hopefulness. But why is hope important?
Well, I think that's a great statistic to mention. Hope is not an action. It's a belief, and it's an emotion. And I think that what a lot of college students today have seen is that we came out of a recession before when they were younger, and they got to see things take off. And I think a lot of them are hopeful that can return, even if it takes some time. I think the other thing that a lot of college students I talk to are hopeful about is that this slowdown taught them a lot more about themselves. It taught them how much they actually don't like technology. It taught them how much they do need to see people. Even the high school students that I work with are like, man, I didn't really think I liked going to school. And now that I can't, I realize like school is actually just a social experience. It's not even really about grades. And so I think
I'm sure their faculty love that. I said, I'm sure their faculty love that.
Yeah, I didn't care. I was like, you're right. It is just a social experiment. It's all you're all going to be okay. But no, I think what's hopeful about this is sustaining the things that we learned about ourselves and how we can build a different future. And that's what the college students that I've been talking to are focusing on. Not just the economic recovery, but like the personal recovery and reaching out to people more and checking in and letting people know what things mean to you.
Yeah. And I think that as again, I don't know if many of us will know, we've already heard so many different forecasting and scenarios and models. And so I can only imagine how college students, especially our sorority women who have recruitment in the fall, they're asking all those questions as to what will that look like? And nobody can really give them answers at this point. There, a lot of different thoughts and opinions, I think, about what to do with that. As you think about specifically our world as sororities going back to college campuses, how important is community going to be
Whew,
to mental health? That's a big question, and that
is,
one
yeah.
was not on my script. But community, I think we talk about friendship, we talk about sisterhood, but how important will community be to help with mental health and coping and everything that we know you've taught us?
I think that community has always been critical. And I think that we've seen that recently as the rates of loneliness in college students are at their highest level ever, as the rates of empathy are at their lowest levels ever, as this social media and digital age has heightened anxiety and other mental health issues. And I think that, again, what people are going to see from this is that there's a difference between an online community and kind of this real community. And I think where TriDelta and other organizations are going to separate themselves is by providing that real connection, that real community, that in-person sense of belonging and values, and having a belief in something bigger than you. You know, there's a lot of data that shows when people don't have a belief in something bigger than themselves, whether it's religion or spirituality or volunteerism, something, their mental health struggles are even deeper because everything kind of becomes about them. And so when we talk about community and we talk about the future, that focus on values and that focus on what is bigger than us, whether it's the organization or somebody else's beliefs, it's going to be critical, especially during this time of uncertainty and changing frontiers.
And I mean, our hope is that we are partners with college campuses in bringing our students back, and that TriDeltas will come back and be a part of the reason why others come back. And we want to be that for college campuses and for our members. This isn't the first time that our organizations and that TriDelta specifically has come back from world events. None like this maybe in our lifetime, but we have, and it's important to remember that somebody had hoped that we would continue to be a place that women would call home. And I think that that's where community will continue to be as a part of TriDelta and, in the world that we create. So it goes back to the beginning. We were founded to be a part to support women, by women, founded by women for women. And let's hopefully that's where we are today. And, as our women come back, we're going to need them to be braver and bolder and kinder than ever. That's what we're going to hope for. So, and we're going to support, and that's where we've tried to do all along. So, well, would you be okay if we got some questions from some of our listeners or our watchers to see? I think that someone's gonna share some of those questions with us, but we really encourage you. Ross is a friend to TriDelta, but he's also an expert and an advocate, and really has brought mental health awareness and why it should be important to campuses, whether they're high school or college or even elementary schools. Ross has been all over the world, so he's a good person to ask some questions. So let's see. I think we have our first one from Meredith. She says, "Can you share any good resources for mental health support for if campus resources are not available to you?"
Yeah, and that's a great question. So one of the most amazing things that I've seen in the mental health community that came out of COVID-19 was it's the first time that I've ever seen all of the mental health organizations work together to put their resources in one place. And it's a website called psychhub.com. And it's psychhub.com. But it has videos, all kinds of downloads, all kinds of information for anything you could possibly imagine. And then it has links to local resources if you need them. It has hotlines to call, numbers you can text. It has free counseling services. I mean, it has everything. And I've never seen the mental health community come together like that in the past. So if anyone is ever struggling or needs anything, psychhub.com is really the best place to go right now.
Psychhub.com. We'll make sure and share that as well on our social media platforms and in our resources. Interesting that you say, though, that this is the first time that the mental health community has come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, usually with nonprofit organizations, there's a kind of a battle for funding. So
That
if
makes sense.
one group is like trying to remove stigma, they don't necessarily want to work with another group trying to remove stigma because they see it as like, well, we might lose that funding. And so unfortunately, in at least in the US, there's kind of like a Hunger Games of nonprofits of like who's going to survive the most. And so it usually takes like big events to bring people together where they kind of have to back burner that because I think the reality is, donations to nonprofit organizations are really down during this time where people aren't sure what's going to happen. And so I don't think it becomes more about what we need for the future. It becomes more about like what can we do right now.
Right. And Tri Delta is very fortunate. The Behind Happy Faces program is sponsored by the Tri Delta Foundation, and that's sisters supporting sisters. And Tri Delta has been very fortunate that our members, continue to believe in the programs and the educational opportunities, as well as the individual help for the Crescent Fund to individual members who have financially struggled during this time and other times, but very fortunate and thankful for the Tri Delta Foundation for really bringing you and allowing you to be a part of our members' experience. So you're right. It's important that our nonprofits continue to be supported and that we continue to fund and to help all of them in whatever way. And like I'm saying, the Tri Deltas they come forward and they show up in sharing their treasure and their time when it comes time to that. So thank you to the Tri Delta Foundation and our members for supporting the Behind Happy Faces program. Ross said that empathy is at an all-time low. I'm a chapter advisor. This is a question. How can I demonstrate empathy to my chapter members? What steps can I take to show them that I care? That's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And I'm going to address it from a couple of angles. So number one, the University of Michigan has been giving the same empathy test out for the past 2 decades. And each year the scores get lower and lower and lower. So there is data showing this. It's from the University of Michigan. There's a couple of things that needs to happen. Brene Brown has gotten such a huge following and has so many amazing talks on the power of empathy.
Oh, I'm a fan. I'm a fan.
Yeah. And so what I've learned from all of that is that empathy does not only need to be taught, but it needs to be modeled. And what I was talking about earlier in this conversation, when I was saying like, we don't let people have emotions, we just try to move them past it. Brene Brown talks about that a lot, where if somebody has an emotion, we try to silver lining it. That's her words. So if somebody says something like, oh, I'm not doing well in whatever math, silver lining would be like, but you're doing well in this other subject. Or, if somebody says, I just went through a breakup, the silver lining of it would be like, but there's so many people available. So the empathy piece is actually connecting with where that person is and letting them feel what they feel. I do a lesson on the differences between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Sympathy is acknowledging that someone has emotions, which is very important. You might be in a situation where all you can say is, I'm so sorry that someone died, or I'm so sorry that you're going through this. And that's sympathy at its core. Empathy is feeling with someone. And so it's actually like letting them know either that you get it, or you've been there, or that you understand them, or that you want to understand them, or that you feel with them. So sympathy is feeling for them. Empathy is feeling with them. But the last part of it that often gets lost is compassion, which is actually taking an action after you connect with somebody. If empathy is just the end goal, then we all just start feeling what everyone else feels, but nobody necessarily does anything about it. And so it's important to have all three of those. And so as an advisor, you should talk about empathy. Brene Brown has great videos about it. You should model it. That's an extremely important thing. And then you should create like different ways that members can be empathetic with each other. But I do think it's really important for them to understand the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion.
Excellent. Excellent. Good job. Here's another one. I'm a chapter officer and many of my members are checked out. How do I balance giving them grace and also holding them to the commitment they made to Tri Delta, especially when we think about all of the work that has to be done to plan for the fall?
Yeah, and that is like a really, really great question. I'm gonna actually want you to weigh in on this too, and I'm not gonna duck it. I'm gonna answer it first, but
Okay.
I think it would be great for you to weigh in on it as well. I think that this goes back to kind of like, how do we tie people to something that's bigger than them right now and give them that community during this time? Chapter meetings on Zoom are not the same as chapter meetings in person. And I think it's going to be really important to not just say that Tri Delta is an important part of this community as they're going through it, but show it to them. And so instead of having standard meetings where it's just kind of about how's everybody doing or something like that, be intentional about the check-ins at the chapter meetings that show them how they can support each other and what can happen from an organization perspective. And what I mean by that is, like, change the prompt. Don't keep it generic to how are you doing? Make it more specific of like, what is everyone worried about right now? How can we be proactive in creating support for that? Why are you checked out? Like, one of the most powerful things I've seen people do when we facilitate is, when people are quiet or checked out, just pulling back and being like, hey, what's happening? Why is this happening? And having a conversation about that so that you're acknowledging it and then having them feel heard. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about this.
Well, it's interesting because I've been calling some students as part of my role, and somebody said, do they answer? I'm like, yeah, they answer, or they call me back and we have a conversation. And so I think our students especially have been really used to being scripted, or this is where we talk about this topic, whether it's conduct or standards or whatever it is, instead of having a conversation. We've gotten very used to fining people or making something mandatory or for points. And hopefully, my dream would be that we would come out of this and everybody would be like, I'm just going to show up because I really want to be around you people. And I think the way that we see sorority is going to be different. It's not going to be the same exact way. As we know, we can't come out of a pandemic and be like, now we're going to talk about the color of bid day shirts. I think that things are a little more serious. And so I think we have to touch our members, like you said, be intentional. I think that was one of the first pieces of it. I think we do have to help them feel like they're a part of this, as opposed to just showing up for something. It's a little bit different now. Give them something to do. Maybe we're going to learn from one another that our members will engage if there's something for them to engage about. And let's hope maybe that social capital isn't, because we haven't really maybe had it during these months, that maybe just caring about one another, being friends, being family together, and accomplishing something will become more important. Those are the people who say to me, Marianne, there's going to be big parties and that's all everybody's going to worry about. I have to give our students more credit than that. I'm hoping that they come back and they care about whatever it is that they make a priority. And maybe it doesn't have to be all things to all people, but that to me is what's important at this time. So
yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. Courtney from Facebook said, what about those dealing with grief during this time? Any advice for coping with that? We
Yeah,
know
and
that
so
some
that
people have lost folks and, or they're
yeah.
grieving some other things, didn't get to graduate. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but, not crazy, but crazy in the sense of, somebody didn't get to do the things that they thought that they've been dreaming of all this time. That's grief. And then there's grief of losing someone. How do you suggest they cope?
Yeah, and so one thing I didn't get to mention during our back and forth about this is, so everyone's mental health is going to be tough during this time, but for people who have diagnosed mental health disorders, or for people who do go through um, grief or loss or trauma or something like that, like this time is going to be extra hard, and it's not going to be just in line with everybody else. And so for the people who lost someone during this, and let's be clear, like it's not over.
Right.
The numbers aren't like seemingly going down a ton. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what the summer is going to look like. So if you've lost someone, it's really hard to have closure because you most likely weren't able to have a funeral. You weren't able to say goodbye. You weren't able to have those moments. And obviously, like in all deaths, you don't get that chance. Certainly, everyone watching this call didn't get to say goodbye or have some closure with everyone who's passed in their life. But I think that the whole that's created in grief comes from a lot of different places, and one of them is that missing, and that all the what ifs, and all the pain that comes from losing someone. And so we're in an unprecedented time where we have to do things kind of differently to celebrate people's lives. And if that means delaying the ceremony or delaying the thing that can help provide some closure until you're able to do it, like make sure you do it. Make sure you have that moment in some way, because if you just push it off and say like, well, it's a pandemic, and then you never do it, you're not giving yourself that space to celebrate somebody's life in the ways that you need. I think the other thing is being patient with yourself, because it's going to complicate everything you're already going through. People's emotions during this quarantine are already pretty high, and adding grief to it is going to make the days harder. It's going to make things feel like there's no point or purpose. And so again, it's going back to like whatever you can do in this moment to try and address the not the inability to replace someone, and then taking time when you can, when things do lighten, to make sure that you take those steps to address it, because um, grief's really hard.
Very good. Very good. Emma from the UK, founding class of Canada Delta, has a question that says, what kind of opportunities should we focus on creating in our own communities as we navigate the challenges ahead?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I was doing the time difference. I was like, Emma, it's almost 1 a.m. Can you?
She's committed to being here. I love that. Thank you. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. Yeah. But can you repeat the question? I got distracted by the time zone.
What kind of opportunities should we focus on creating in our own communities as we navigate the challenges ahead?
Yeah. And so I think the opportunities you can focus on in your own like smaller communities should be persistent. One. So like another thing humans are great at is doing this thing where they're like, man, that pandemic was rough. Guess we'll just move on until it pops up as a problem again. And life doesn't work like that. So being persistent And again, having those intentional kind of prompts in your community can be really helpful. One of the best ways to come up with those prompts is to ask people in your community what they need. Maybe they want to talk about friendship. Maybe they want to talk about relationships. Maybe they want to talk about coping. Maybe they want to talk about anxiety about the future, whatever it is. I think the most important thing you can do with those opportunities is continue to have them. Even if you don't get buy-in in the beginning, being persistent and saying, like, we're going to do this because this is how I want to see my community. We have to model and, be the change that we want to see, which is a really famous quote. And so it's going to be creating smaller opportunities. I think another thing that's important is making those opportunities approachable and comfortable, as opposed to like this big deal that like changes everyone's perspective and just normalizes connection rather than just continuing that isolation.
Yeah. We had a high school senior on our street who couldn't graduate with her class and, was going to be one of the, how many ever summa cum laude valedictorians. And so I said, well, I have regalia and Marie has regalia. And so we said, let's just do a social distancing graduation on your front porch and you can give your speech. And so we had the police come and chief of police came and presented her with some stuff. And, it was truly an example of community. Everybody sat distanced and it was just our small community's way of doing something special. And for her, she said, for me, I think this is probably better than a graduation with 400 other people. And so, and in her speech, and I thought it was interesting that an 18-year-old, she didn't talk about the fun time she had with her friends. She talked about community and how this community had been there for her. And so I think you're right. I think there are opportunities that we have and we will have as things, start coming out of this a little bit differently. So very important, very important. So here's another one. Probably our last question. I think we're getting close to time. When I think about this time, the word disrupted comes to mind. Many of our routines and ways of life have been disrupted. What advice do you have for navigating this disruption? It's a good question.
Okay. Yeah, and that disruption is a real thing. And so the only advice I can really give is going back to how do you take control over what you have control of, right? If you focus on just the disruption, then you focus on kind of what's out of control and you lose that locus of control again. So how do you communicate with your friends? How do you communicate with your family? How can you take care of your coping skills, your exercise, your purpose, your sense of pride, whatever it is? And then also inside of that, one thing that can help is kind of reframing situations. So when neuroscientists talk about how to change bad stress into good stress, one skill they use is reframing. An example would be like when someone says, oh my gosh, this test is going to be so hard. My goal is to not fail. Another way to say that would be like, this test is going to be so hard. I'm going to study as much as I can. This test is going to be so hard. I'm going to ask somebody for help. What we do when things feel disrupted is we kind of start framing things in that way. Like, this quarantine sucks so much. I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to have all of the opportunities I had. And then reframing it would be like, okay, if I lose my job, what are some steps I can take? Who can I reach out to in my community? What can I do? So it's not even just locus of control. It's also changing how we frame these issues in our lives.
That's a good point. Why are we as humans so afraid to ask for help?
Man, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think mental health has been viewed in such a negative light, and it's been kind of like a sign of weakness if you ask for help. And I think that there's people who view it that way. I think currently there's a lot more people who view it as like, I don't want to burden someone else with my problems. Everyone has problems. I'm not the only one. I don't want to do this to somebody else. And so I think it doesn't matter so much why I don't think it benefits us to focus on all of the reasons why we don't seek help if we're not moving past them. So, like, for example, when I wasn't compliant with my mental health treatment, it was because I felt embarrassed and ashamed and stupid and weird and weak. And so those were the why, but I actually had to identify them and work on them for me to be able to move forward. And so I think that's the most important part, is knowing that we all have our reasons, but what can we do to move past them?
That makes sense. Well, Ross, we are so thankful that you are on this journey with us and that TriDelta is partnering with you. And I think you know that from our board to our volunteers, our alumni, our advisors, and our students. You have really become someone that we turn to and value the relationship that we have with you. And so, from me personally, I am so appreciative of the work that you do in college spaces and with our members, but more so than anything, you're just teaching us all how to be better and how to help one another and support one another. And so we are very thankful for your relationship with us and your friendship, and we hope that we will continue this for a long time to come, because we know that you're making a difference. You are making a difference, and in TriDelta, we hope that we're making a difference in one another's lives as well. So, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I just think that the only thing I can say is, one, thank you so much. I mean, I really appreciate this partnership and the opportunity to work with TriDelta and the chance to even have a forum of speaking about this with all of your members. It means a lot to me. So thank you very much. And I think the only thing I always close with is just letting people know and reminding people that all of you have your own stories in this. You have your own journeys with mental health. You have your own experiences, and no one will really know what those experiences are or what you're going through unless you open up and unless you share it. And you really have no idea where your own personal story can take you until you tell it. So reach out, use the supports that you have, talk to the communities that you have, develop them deeper and make them stronger, and really do what you can to connect, because this is an extreme time. And fortunately, you're a part of an organization that does care about it.
And TriDeltas, those of you who joined us today and those of you who watch, we appreciate you being here as well, and that you decided to spend an hour with us to say mental health, whether it be your own or one another or others, that it is important for us to talk about and to support one another. As a network of women, there is nothing that we can't do when we stand together. And our members now and later will need one another. And so, again, we want to thank Ross for being with us today, and thank you for being here. And the Behind Happy Faces program, we know, will continue, and as we move forward, will make a difference. And we do appreciate the TriDelta Foundation for supporting that effort in that program. So thank you to everyone for being here. As we go into this weekend of Memorial Day, remember those who have fought for us to be able to have the lives that we do and for us to have freedom. And so be safe, be good to one another, and stay healthy. Wash your hands and stay distant, but stay connected. So thank you, Ross. We appreciate you, and we appreciate each one of you for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much.